Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the farm. Let's keep going with our trend of looking back before we look forward. Let's go way back to November of 2022, a long time ago. If you remember, I have a land bridge that connects the front portion of my property across the pond to the back portion of my property. And this land bridge has been overgrown for probably 20 years, nearly impassable. So way back in November 2022, I embarked on the start of a project to clear out the land bridge, specifically to clear the entrance from the farm road to the land bridge, which was completely impassable because of trees and debris and deadfall. So I started by chainsawing a whole bunch of stuff out of the way so that I could actually take this walk from the tractor path through the overgrowth onto the land bridge. And as you can see, this is not an ideal path, nor is it a good way to get to the land bridge. But once I was on the land bridge, that's when I actually started to do work. I started to clear things out. There's a lot of shrubbery, a lot of brush, a lot of trees, and a lot of overgrowth. So very simply, one by one, I started to cut things down so that I could make the beginnings of a path, or I should say, remake the beginnings of a path. Essentially, I went left to right, shrub to shrub, or tree to tree, and I just started cutting everything down. As you can imagine, this wound up causing a huge debris pile, which I then just piled up sort of at the start of the path. Now, as you can imagine, this was an absolute ton of work in weather conditions that were not ideal. This is probably not the thing you want to do in November or December or January, but the upside of doing this in the winter months is that you don't have to deal with the foliage that hides all of the stems and stalks and branches and all the stuff that has to be cut down. So it makes for easier access to the things that actually need to be cut. So this was probably 2 weeks worth of work across maybe 4 or 5 days, but at the end, look at this. The land bridge was visible. It was cleared, and for snowshoeing purposes at least, I was able to navigate from one side of the land bridge to the other. However, this wasn't the end of the story. The fallen tree that you see going across the path, that path is the only way to get to the land bridge, so all of that needs to be cleared out. But about a month later, in probably late December of 2022, after having snowshoed across the path a few times, I was getting frustrated by all of the rest of the debris that was still in the path. So what I did is came back out with the chainsaw, cut down even more of the shrubbery debris on the left-hand side of this land bridge, and then I also started to cut down some of those trees on the right-hand side. Those trees were not planted. Those were seeds that were deposited by animals over the years, and then the trees simply grew up. This was a cleared land bridge for the purposes of getting a tractor across. So there was absolutely no vegetation on this when the land bridge was first constructed. But needless to say, 2022 was a good year for the recreation of the land bridge. And the work that was done in 2022 has largely stayed unchanged until the current point, which is the new year of 2024. Unfortunately, during that time, though, things grew back up, as they always do. So if we fast forward to summer of 2023, about July, you may recall that my cousin Jim swung by on his ATV. Jim lives in a house that borders the side of my farm, and he wanted to see the beehives, and he also wanted to go out onto the land bridge to look at the pond and to see if beavers had dammed up any of the water channels. So we got to the area of the fallen tree, which is the entrance of the tractor path to the land bridge, and this moment right here was pivotal for the work that I did in late 2023. As you can see, this path, the only way to get to the land bridge, was completely grown over, and it was probably chest high, but the rest of the land bridge remained fairly decent. Everything stayed cut down, and only certain weeds and brambles and bushes regrew, but the land bridge was still completely passable. While this scenery is nice to look at, I want to revisit this moment again, because as I said, this was critical to a problem that I had in August of 2023. I was walking this exact path and I got stuck in pricker bushes. The pricker bushes were about 7 feet tall, and I was trying to make my way through them to get to the land bridge. And unfortunately, it caught my pants, it caught my shirt, it caught my sleeves, and I couldn't move. I was stuck in pricker bushes for the better part of 5 minutes. Panic actually set in. So after I managed to rip myself free, I said, this is the moment that I'm going to do something. I had just gotten my tractor back, and I drove it all the way back here, and I started clearing stuff. Now you can see that fallen tree as the entrance to the land bridge, and you can see what I've started to do. I started to clear a path all the way through this entrance out onto the land bridge. Now what you're seeing in front of you right now is probably 3 hours worth of work. And essentially the process of how I got here is pretty much how you see on the screen here. I dropped the bucket, I scraped ahead about 3 or 4 feet, I dumped the bucket, I went in reverse, and I looked to see what had been done. And then I just did it over and over and over again. And while a compact or a subcompact tractor isn't really made for ground clearing like this, and by that I mean it's not a bulldozer, if you go slow and if you just stick to clearing the top growth of the ground, which is all I was doing here, it works just fine. It's a slow process, but this is how I cleared all that space in the beginning and how I am clearing all the space moving forward to the first of those drainage ditches. And eventually, if you scrape long enough, you get down to dirt, and that's how this was all cleared. At certain locations on the land bridge, however, there were significant dips. So what I did is I came back out onto the main tractor path, and I started to simply scrape the top layer of soil all throughout different areas of this path, right in the beginning where I first cut in, as well as back on the path itself. This path has been gone over many, many, many times by some different implements that I have at the farm. So this is mostly fresh soil. It's not compacted, it's not like concrete. So I'm just gently and slowly scraping and building up very small piles of dirt right at the entrance. Now after 4 or 5 passes, and after I come up with at least a bucket worth of dirt, I then go through and I scoop up that bucket, and I take whatever dirt has been accumulated thus far and I bring it further back down the land bridge path, and I find the areas that are low, and there's a lot of them. So my goal here is not to make the path completely level top to bottom, left to right in this phase. This is merely a way to level the path enough so that I could maneuver the tractor over those dips and valleys. And by moving this material and relocating it to the low areas, I was able to do that probably 5 or 6 times into areas that would have otherwise been impassable because there was such a drastic dip. Once I dump the dirt, then I just press it down with the bucket, I go back and forth a couple times, and I start the process over again. Clearing the land bridge was not the easiest project. However, the decision to clear the land bridge was a very easy decision. This is a necessary component of my property. I need to be able to cross this land bridge in order to get to the rear of my property. So each time I need to go back there, I really don't feel like getting hung up to the point of panic in just a grove of pricker bushes. So with the help of the tractor, light work, or relatively light work, was made of at least the start of this process. Now, as you can see in these videos, only the center of the land bridge for now is getting cleared, and that's going to have to be dealt with differently, probably in the spring. For now though, let's fast forward to more present times, fall of 2023. The tractor, thankfully, is still running very well, everything's good, and the chores and tasks on the farm remain. One of the tasks that is always present is checking in on the bees. Fortunately, my bee friends are pretty self-sufficient, but it's nice to give them some homemade nectar and check on them every now and then. One of the really cool features of this hive is the ability to remove different panels, such as this one right here. I can then look in at the honey production taking place in the individual frames. I harvested no honey this year. I left it all for the bees to grow their colony and get them through the winter. Moving further down the tractor path to the land bridge, I decided that it was time to try and clean up the sides of the land bridge, the areas that I couldn't tackle by just scraping the ground with the tractor, and fall seemed like a good time to do it. Much like everything, the process was pretty time-consuming, but I used my two trusty tools, my very nice weed whacker, as well as my chainsaw, and I first went down both sides of the path and cleared as much of the low-lying weeds and foliage as I could, all the way up to essentially where the water is on the left and to the right. I could only get so far though, and then I had to switch to the chainsaw. Now there's a fine balance here. I don't want to take off too much foliage because there are houses nearby and I'd like to maintain some privacy in the area here, but I wanted to take enough out so that the foliage doesn't interfere with the tractor or any other vehicle that I bring down this path. Now the work that I'm doing here with the weed whacker and the chainsaw, this is probably about 10% of what actually needs to be done. Eventually, I'm going to have to come down here with some heavy equipment and mechanically remove the sides of this land bridge, especially on the left where you see a lot of those piles of dirt, which are really roots and shrubbery and just piles of stuff, but not too shabby for a first attempt. And that chunk of work essentially wraps up all of the work on the land bridge that was conducted in the fall of this past year. Everything turned out really nice. The land bridge is nice and clear, and once again this year it's passable for any kind of snowshoeing or winter activities. And speaking of winter, that brings us up to where we are today. Early January here in central New York, and even the geese are confused. They're still around. But let's take the grand tour of the land bridge path as far as what was completed up until fall of this year. We start out at the arched tree that's half fallen over, and this is the brand new path, all leveled, all graded, about 8 to 10 feet wide, and it brings you around a gentle curve, which a tractor or any other vehicle can navigate, and it brings you right out onto the land bridge. Now, as we've seen, the center of it is completely clear down to dirt. The left-hand side and the right-hand side are a lot of shrub brush, fell trees, branches, limbs, piles of dirt, stumps, and various other things that need to be cleared out with some heavy equipment, which fortunately I have in stock in the field of my farm, ready for the spring. So we hop over the two drainage ditches, the lower and the higher one, and it brings us out to the back acreage of my property, which is perfect. Spinning around, we see a clear and unobstructed view all the way back. So this is great. The first higher drainage ditch toward the back of my property is not flowing anything, which is normal. This one's higher than the other one, so this is kind of an overflow. But the lower ditch is draining perfectly. There's no obstructions, no junk, no beaver activity. Eventually, these two drainage ditches will both go away in favor of one centrally located, larger drainage ditch in the very middle of the land bridge, which I will have to cut in with a backhoe. Moving back out of the land bridge, there's a slight rise in elevation up to the tractor path. So once again, we will go under this arched, fallen over tree, and it spits us right back out onto the tractor path toward the beehive and then back eventually toward the farm. Now on the land bridge, there's a whole lot of junk that needs to be cleaned out. Additionally, there's a lot of trees and limbs that have been pushed out of the way hastily in the fall of the year when I did the majority of the work to the path. This also will need to be cut down and cleared out. Spinning around to the other side, there's a gigantic brush pile, or a series of brush piles, where I just tossed all of the saplings and everything. Now there is some overhead work to be done, some branches that still need to be cut down, and of course the iconic arch fallen limb. This tree needs to be taken out completely. As we move back to the farm, this wonderful January warm weather has done wonders for the grass in the back field. Now there's a lot more to come. Stay tuned. We still have other projects to go through. We still have equipment that we have to see, and we still have to get into the winter projects. That's all for this video. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you on the next one.